I remember the evening as if it were pressed into my memory with a hot iron. The restaurant glowed with golden light chandeliers swaying slightly from the hum of voices. It was my parents' 35th wedding anniversary, a milestone they wanted the whole family to witness. White linen tablecloths stretched across the long tables, crystal glasses waiting to be filled, and waiters moved like shadows carrying trays of champagne. I walked in quietly, clutching my invitation, and immediately felt the weight of eyes. My sister, well, I call her my sister, though. We had never felt like family waved me over. Her name is Casey. She was dressed in a deep emerald gown, sparkling earrings, swaying, and a smile sharp enough to cut glass. When I approached, she tilted her head toward a table, shoved near the trash station right by the swinging door where servers came and went. Sorry, she said, voice dripping with sweet cruelty. This table is for successful people. You don't belong here. The words rang louder than the clinking glasses around us. A couple of guests chuckled. One even looked at me with pity, which somehow burned worse than the insult itself. My hands tightened around the leather folder I had brought something ordinary I used to carry receipts. It suddenly felt like a shield. I sat down where she told me near the trash can, pretending the smell of garlic and onions, wafting from the kitchen, did not sting my pride. I tried to breathe evenly, but humiliation has a way of making the air heavy. The dinner rolled on. Laughter toasts little speeches about love and commitment. I was invisible. Plates came and went. Wine poured freely. I barely touched my glass. I stared at the keys in my pocket. My apartment key small and unremarkable. No one asked me about my life, my work, or what I had been struggling toward. It was easier for them to pretend I did not exist, except as the punchline to a family joke. When dessert was served, tiramisu on plates dusted with cocoa, I thought perhaps the ordeal was ending. Then the waiter placed the final bill on the main table, a brown leather case embossed with the restaurant's logo. Casey flipped it open with a flourish, then turned her gaze to me, mocking as ever. Well, Morgan, she said, since you've been quiet all night, maybe you'd like to contribute. It comes to $2,800. Surely you can manage a little. Her friends smirked. My parents shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. I looked at the neat rows of numbers printed on cream paper, the ink still glistening. I let the silence stretch, then closed the folder gently and pushed it back across the table. Then let the successful people pay for it, I said. My voice was calm, almost too calm, but inside my chest something cracked open. Gasps, a few awkward laughs, a clatter of forks. I smoothed my jacket and walked away. The restaurant's music swelled behind me, violins echoing over my retreat. I felt strangely light, as though setting down a burden I had carried too long. But what they did not know was this. I had been keeping track. Every slight, every whispered insult, every cruel word. I had records, pieces of truth stored like ammunition. I had not yet revealed them. That would come later. I stepped outside into the night air, cool against my skin. Cars hissed along the boulevard, neon signs flickered, and for the first time in years I allowed myself a small smile. They thought they had humiliated me. They thought I would go home and cry. But I had already begun writing the next chapter, one they would never expect. I will explain in a moment. This part matters. If you have ever been humiliated by your own family, tell me in the comments. I need to know I am not alone. I grew up in that family like a shadow at the edge of the photograph. When people looked at us, their eyes went straight to Casey, always Casey. She was the golden one, the achiever, the pride they paraded before neighbors and distant cousins. I, on the other hand, was simply there, present enough to fetch things or nod politely, but not enough to be remembered. I was 26 then, working shifts at a large supermarket chain. Some weeks I stocked shelves until midnight. Others I worked the register, smiling at strangers who barely glanced up. The pay wasn't glamorous, but it was steady. The irony was that while my family sneered at the job, I had quietly built a cushion of savings. I lived in a modest apartment, cooked my meals, and learned how to stretch every dollar until it bent in half. What they never knew, and what I guarded like a secret flame, was that I had been chosen for a scholarship program through a business foundation. It covered tuition books and even provided a modest stipend. The condition was simple: finish the coursework in management and complete an internship with a finance firm that handled assets worth millions. For me, it was a door opening to a world my family never thought I could enter. I didn't tell them. Experience had taught me that any good news would be twisted into another demand. If they knew I had opportunities, they would ask for money favors, proof that I was finally catching up to Casey. So I kept quiet, attending classes after work, reading case studies in the back corner of a laundromat while my clothes spun in the dryer. I lived two lives, the one they mocked and the one I was building. The cruelty wasn't always loud. Sometimes it came in whispers I wasn't meant to hear. One afternoon, I stopped by my parents' house unannounced. The front door was ajar, voices drifting from the kitchen. I froze on the porch when I heard my mother's tone sharp and clipped. "It's embarrassing that Morgan still works retail," she told her sister over the phone. "Sometimes I can't even admit we're related. Casey is running a bakery, expanding, doing interviews with the local paper, and what does Morgan have? A name tag and a cash register." Her words struck me harder than any slap. I leaned against the railing trying to breathe, but the air felt heavy as if I'd swallowed stones. She had never said it to my face, but perhaps that was worse. To dismiss me when she thought I wasn't listening, when she believed her gossip would vanish into the air, proved it was her true opinion. I left without knocking, walking past the yard where the grass had grown too tall. Each step away from that house was another reminder that I would never belong in their circle of pride. Casey, meanwhile, flourished. Her bakery had opened 2 years earlier, a trendy little spot with pastel walls and glass cases filled with pastries. She posted daily on social media, racking up likes, sharing photos of lattes decorated with perfect foam hearts. The local paper wrote a feature calling her a rising star in small business. My parents framed the article and hung it in the living room. Whenever I visited, their praise for her was endless. "Did you see Casey's new car? She hired 2 more employees. The mayor stopped by her bakery." Each sentence was another nail, sealing the box they wanted me in: the failed child, the extra seat at the table, the one who should stay quiet. But what they didn't know was that I had started saving their words. Screenshots of texts where they mocked me, recordings of dinner, conversations where my name was the punchline, even voicemails filled with dismissive laughter. I stored them all. It wasn't revenge yet, not fully. It was survival, the proof I needed for myself that I wasn't imagining the cruelty. Sometimes late at night I scrolled through those files. The evidence filled a digital folder I labeled simply "Truth." It steadied me. It reminded me that I wasn't weak or paranoid. The mistreatment was real. And someday I thought it might be useful. But for now I stayed silent. I clocked in, clocked out, sat in classrooms under flickering lights, and kept building the future they couldn't see. Because the day would come when their laughter would choke in their throats. Family gatherings became battlegrounds, though no one ever raised their voice. That was the cruelest part. The war was fought with smiles, with pauses that lingered too long, with jokes disguised as affection. I still went, partly out of habit, partly because some small piece of me hoped things would change. The Sunday dinners at my parents' house always smelled of roast chicken or lasagna dishes meant to comfort. Yet the comfort never reached me. The table was long polished, wood seats always filled. Casey usually arrived last, sweeping in with her husband, and stories of new contracts, bakery expansions, and photo shoots. Everyone leaned forward when she spoke, as though the air itself carried more weight if she breathed it. When my turn came, if I dared mention anything, silence followed. Once I shared that I had taken on evening classes. My father cleared his throat, changed the subject to the weather. My mother asked if Casey's bakery planned to add gluten-free options. My words sank like stones into the carpet. The group chat we all shared told the same story. Casey posted pictures of her shiny car of cakes, stacked high with frosting of plaques from the Chamber of Commerce. The replies poured in hearts, clapping hands, endless strings of admiration. When I sent a photo of my modest apartment after I finally bought a secondhand sofa, no one replied for 2 days. When someone finally did, it was Casey with a thumbs-up emoji, the kind you give to an acquaintance, not a sibling. One evening, I decided to test the pattern. I sent a short message, got promoted to shift supervisor. The screen lit up as messages poured in, but not to me. Casey had posted at nearly the same time a picture of herself shaking hands with the mayor during a charity drive. The chat exploded with congratulations, my message buried before anyone noticed. I should have let it go, but instead I began saving everything. Screenshots of the group chat, especially when my words were ignored. Recordings at dinners where my name became a punchline. I used my phone discreetly, sliding it on the table, capturing the smirks and laughter that came at my expense. My folder labeled "Truth" grew heavier each week. It might sound obsessive, but those files were lifelines. When doubt crept in, when I wondered if maybe I was too sensitive, I opened the folder and listened. Their voices reminded me I was not imagining the disdain. It was real sharp as broken glass. The cruelty sometimes slipped out in bolder ways. At one birthday dinner, I brought a small gift for my mother, a scarf I had saved up for. Casey unwrapped a designer handbag from her husband at the same table. She looked at my gift, lifted it between two fingers, and laughed. "Don't bring cheap things here," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. The room laughed with her, except for me. I sat there, heat rising in my face, gripping the edge of my chair. I said nothing, but later that night I added her words to my collection. I knew deep down that something was building. The silence I carried could not last forever. Like water pressing against a dam, it would one day break. But not yet. For now, I kept quiet. I stocked shelves, I studied case notes on business ethics, I wrote essays late into the night. I nodded at family dinners, endured the group chat, and let them believe I was still the loser they wanted me to be. Because I had learned that patience is not weakness, it is a weapon. By the time my parents' anniversary dinner came around, I was already carrying years of silence in my chest. That evening wasn't the first time Casey had humiliated me, but it was the first time I decided not to swallow it whole. The family group chat had been buzzing for weeks beforehand. Casey, ever the organizer, filled it with instructions about attire schedules and even how we should behave. "Please don't embarrass us," she typed to me one night. "Dress decent for once. It's a big crowd." I read it twice, then 3 times, before saving the screenshot into my folder. Truth, I reminded myself. Every word of theirs was fuel. The dinner began, as always, laughter, champagne, Casey's husband, talking loudly about profits, my parents soaking it all up like sunlight. I tried to fade into the background, but Casey wouldn't allow it. She leaned across the table, her smile sharp as a blade. "Nice jacket, Morgan," she said. "Did you get that from the clearance rack?" A ripple of laughter followed. Even the waiter smirked before setting down the breadbasket. My fork clattered against the plate, though I kept my eyes steady. I wanted to say something, but the time wasn't right. The real twist came when I overheard Casey boasting to one of her friends between courses. She thought I wasn't listening, but my chair was close enough to catch every word. "I had to dip into bakery funds again," she whispered. "Creditors keep calling, but don't worry, no one knows. As long as I keep smiling, they'll believe the success story." My pulse quickened. Here was the woman painted as a model of achievement, admitting she was drowning in debt. And here was I mocked for retail work, while she patched holes in her empire with borrowed threads. I didn't confront her then. I smiled, sipped my water, and let her think her secret was safe. But inside, I knew this was the piece I had been waiting for, the proof that appearances could shatter. When dessert was cleared and the bill placed on the table, Casey saw her chance to cut me down one last time. She opened the folder with exaggerated grace, tapped the line, showing the total $2,800, and turned to me. "Well, Morgan," she said, voice loud enough for half the restaurant to hear, "maybe you can contribute. Even a small amount would help." The laughter was immediate. Glasses clinked, someone coughed to hide a chuckle. My mother looked away. My father rubbed the bridge of his nose. I felt the heat rise, but this time I didn't swallow it. I closed the leather folder, gently slid it back across the table, and said evenly, "Then let the successful people pay for it." The silence afterward was heavier than any laughter. Casey's smile faltered, the waiter froze, and for once I wasn't the one shrinking. That moment was the crack in the dam. I had carried years of evidence of words they thought had vanished into thin air. Now I had the means and the motive to let the world see what I had endured. I walked out of the restaurant into the night air, calm and steady, knowing the war I had fought in silence was about to become very, very loud. I did not sleep that night. The city was quiet, the kind of quiet where even the streetlights seemed to hum, but inside me everything roared. I sat at my kitchen table, the leather bill folder from the restaurant still vivid in my mind, and opened my laptop. The folder labeled, "Truth Waited." Years of screenshots, recordings, careless words my family had thrown like pebbles, without realizing each one left a bruise. I scrolled through them piece by piece. Casey's mocking text, my mother's phone call about being embarrassed, group chat messages where my name sank without reply. They thought their cruelty dissolved into the air. It hadn't. I had preserved it, every bite and scratch of it. The bill from the restaurant was the spark. I took a photo of the receipt with its total $2,800 looming at the bottom. Then I typed a caption that came as naturally as breathing. My family says I don't deserve a seat at their table. Funny how I didn't pay a cent at their $2.800 dinner. I hesitated only for a moment before pressing post. The reaction was volcanic. Within an hour, likes and comments poured in. By dawn, the post had been shared thousands of times. By midday, it had crossed 200,000 shares, screenshots spreading faster than I could track. Strangers from across the country chimed in with their own stories of betrayal, their own scars from families who had belittled them. But the comments that mattered most were the ones directed at Casey. Her bakery's social media accounts were flooded. Is this the business owner who mocked their sibling, "I won't buy pastries from a bully"? Reviews sank like stones thrown into water. One-star ratings appeared in waves, customers vowing never to return. Photos of her cakes were drowned out by angry emojis and accusations. Casey tried to fight back, posting cheerful pictures of croissants and coffee mugs, but the tide would not turn. Screenshots of her group chat messages circulated, especially the one where she had typed, "Morgan is a loser, always will be." Someone leaked it from the family chat. I didn't need to guess who. It could have been any cousin or relative who had witnessed the dynamic for years. The backlash was merciless. News outlets even picked it up small columns about a viral family feud that destroyed a bakery's reputation. I read them with a mixture of disbelief and grim satisfaction. The world was finally seeing the side of Casey I had known all my life. My parents called first with anger, then with pleading. "Take it down, Morgan. You're humiliating us." I listened to their voices crack through the phone, and for once I didn't feel small. "I'm not humiliating you," I said softly. "You did that yourselves. I just stopped covering for you." At work, a colleague patted me on the shoulder. "Saw your post," he said with a crooked smile. "Took guts." For the first time in years, I felt seen. The strange part was that I never set out to destroy Casey's bakery or drag my parents' names into the mud. All I had wanted was for the truth to breathe. But truth, once freed, has a way of growing teeth. By the end of that week, Casey stopped posting. The bakery doors stayed closed for several days, blinds drawn. A sign appeared on the door, "Closed until further notice." People whispered that creditors had been circling for months, that the debt she had hidden so carefully was now crashing down. And me, I walked to class that evening, notebook in hand, the weight on my shoulders lighter than it had been in years. Revenge, I realized, isn't always about shouting or fighting. Sometimes it's as simple as letting the truth speak louder than the lies. The storm that followed was not mine to weather. It belonged to them. Within days, my phone buzzed endlessly. Cousins, aunts, even distant relatives I hadn't spoken to in years sent messages. Some were furious. How could you air family business in public? Others were quietly supportive, whispering that they'd seen the way I was treated, that they had always thought it was wrong. Their words came late, but still they were proof I wasn't imagining it. My parents tried to call each evening. At first their voices carried authority, the old tone that had silenced me since childhood. "Morgan, take that post down. You've humiliated your family enough." When I didn't respond, their tone softened. "Morgan, please. We're being laughed at in church. Do you want to ruin us completely?" I listened once, twice, then stopped picking up. The truth had already left the cage. I had no intention of locking it away again. As for Casey, her silence was louder than any words. The bakery shutters stayed down, windows dark. Whispers spread online that suppliers had cut ties, that employees had quit after customers hurled insults at them across the counter. The local paper that once crowned her a rising star in business printed a very different headline, now viral post: "Sinks Bakery's Reputation." I walked past the shop one evening, the pastel sign fading, the display case empty. I thought I might feel triumphant. Instead, I felt a strange calm. Justice does not always taste sweet. Sometimes it is as plain as a glass of water, necessary but flavorless. The internet, however, never tired of the story. Strangers continued to share my post, adding their own captions. Families can be cruel. Blood is not always thicker than water. I read through hundreds of comments, each one a reminder that humiliation is universal and revenge, when quiet and calculated, resonates far beyond the original wound. Then something unexpected happened. Amid the flood of messages, one email stood out. The subject line was plain: "Internship opportunity." I opened it cautiously, half expecting spam. Instead, it was from a finance firm I had studied in class, a company managing assets worth more than $1 billion. They had seen my name through the scholarship program. "We were impressed with your coursework and recommendations," the email read. "We would like to invite you for an interview." I stared at the screen, heart thudding. While my family was unraveling in the public eye, doors were opening for me, doors they had always insisted were locked. That night I sat in my apartment, the hum of the refrigerator, the only sound. I thought about the years of silence, the dinners where my words were swallowed, the moments I had clutched my phone to record insults, just to remind myself I wasn't losing my mind. And now here it was, proof that the world could see me differently. Not as the failure, not as the extra chair at the table near the trash, but as someone with a future. I closed my laptop slowly, leaning back in my chair. The war at home was still raging. My parents sulking Casey, hiding relatives, gossiping, but I was no longer in the trenches. I had stepped out carrying my truth with me, walking towards something bigger. Graduation day arrived with the same quiet certainty as dawn. The sky was pale blue, the air sharp with spring, and the campus buzzed with gowns, tassels, and laughter. I walked across the lawn in my own cap and gowned the robe heavy on my shoulders, but light in my heart. No one from my family came. There were empty seats where they might have been, but I did not look for them. For the first time in years, I didn't need their presence as proof of my worth. I had proof enough in the degree folded inside its leather cover embossed in gold. After the ceremony, students crowded together for photos, parents fussing with cameras. I stepped aside, held up my phone, and took a picture of myself against the backdrop of the university seal. Then I opened my social media account, the same one that had carried my revenge weeks earlier, and typed a new message. Turns out the family failure had the best plan all along. I posted it with the photograph. By evening, it had spread almost as widely as the dinner bill had. This time, though, the tone was different. Strangers congratulated me. Former classmates commented with pride. Even colleagues from the supermarket sent notes, "Knew you'd do it." Meanwhile, Casey broke her silence. A message appeared in my inbox, plain and pitiful. "Morgan, can we talk? I know I said awful things. Please take down your posts. The bakery can't survive this. I need your help." I stared at her words for a long time, my fingers hovering over the keys. A year earlier, I might have rushed to comfort her, to bend myself smaller so she could stand taller. But not anymore. I closed the message without replying. The finance firm's interview came soon after. I wore my best suit, modest but neat, and answered their questions with the calm of someone who had weathered harsher storms than any boardroom could deliver. When they offered me the internship, I accepted with a steady voice, though inside, something bloomed like a long-suppressed seed finally reaching the sun. Walking home that evening, briefcase in hand, I passed the bakery again. Its windows were covered with brown paper, now a for lease sign taped crookedly to the glass. I paused, looking at the reflection of my cap and gown still folded over my arm. I thought of the years of dismissal, of the nights I scrolled through my folder of truth, convincing myself I wasn't crazy. And now here was the reality: I had survived. Their rejection, and in surviving, I had won. Success, I realized, is not always measured in applause or headlines. Sometimes it is measured in the simple fact of standing upright when others expected you to crawl. Life after that graduation moved forward in steady strides. My mornings no longer began with the dread of another shift stocking shelves. Instead, I woke with purpose, slipping into a suit, heading into the heart of the city where glass towers gleamed. The finance firm's offices were vast and humming with energy, filled with people whose conversations spun around numbers in the millions. For the first time, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged. At my desk, I sometimes paused, staring at the skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows. I would think of the dinners where my words went unheard of, the laughter that stung more than silence. Those memories no longer broke me. They sharpened me. They reminded me why I had chosen to collect every insult, every slight, and why I had chosen finally to let them see the light. My family, meanwhile, receded into shadows. My parents stopped calling after their last attempt ended in tears and accusations. Casey disappeared almost completely. I heard whispers how she tried reopening under a new name, how creditors circled like vultures, but none of it reached me directly. The bakery that once symbolized their pride was nothing more than an empty storefront now. One evening, while walking home, I passed that familiar corner. The for lease sign still hung there, paper curling at the edges, tape yellowed by sun. I paused, watching strangers hurry by without a second glance. To them, it was just another vacant shop. To me, it was the grave of a long war, a reminder that cruelty once unleashed has a way of returning home. I did not feel triumphant. I felt free. Later that night, I sat at my desk and opened the folder still marked truth. Screenshots, recordings, transcripts, all the evidence I once clutched like a lifeline. I scrolled through them slowly, then clicked delete. The folder vanished. I no longer needed it. My proof now lived in the life I had built, not in their voices. People still comment on my old posts from time to time, sharing their own stories of betrayal and survival. I read them with quiet recognition. Families can be cruel, yes, but they can also teach us strength we didn't know we had. And as I sit here penning these memories in the calm after the storm I leave you, with this sometimes revenge is not about shouting or striking back. Sometimes it is about walking away taller than they ever thought you could, letting the world see what they refused to see, and never needing their applause again. If you think Morgan's revenge was justified, comment justified. If you would have done it differently, share your idea below. I am listening.